What do you do when everything falls apart and heaven says nothing? When prayers echo into the night with no reply and the silence feels louder than your cries? What do you do when you've lived righteously, walked with integrity, honored God, and still suffering comes? This is not just a story of a man who lost everything. This is a story of a God who didn't explain himself, and of a man who kept worshiping anyway. His name was Job. He wasn't perfect, but he was blameless, respected in his community, a man of great wealth, a devoted father, a faithful servant of God. And in just a single day, his entire life would be shattered, not because he failed, but because heaven allowed it. This story will not offer easy answers. It will not promise quick relief, but it will reveal a truth that's hard and holy. Sometimes God is silent and still completely present. So if you've ever walked through loss, through confusion, through silence, you are not alone. Today, we walk through this valley with Job, step by step, tear by tear, until we find a kind of faith that doesn't need to understand in order to trust. In a land far from the noise of empires and kings, between deserts and mountains, lived a man named Job. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't a prophet. He didn't part seas or lead armies. But in the eyes of heaven, Job was great. Scripture calls him blameless, upright, a man who feared God and turned away from evil, not out of fear of punishment, but because his heart was aligned with heaven. His life was full. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, children who laughed often, who shared meals together, who feasted and celebrated life in one another's homes. Job was wealthy, but his wealth wasn't just measured in gold. It was in peace. He owned thousands of sheep grazing on distant hills, camels walking in caravans across the horizon, oxen working the land, donkeys feeding in stables built with care. He had hundreds of servants, and yet he treated them with dignity. People in his town respected him. When Job walked into the city gates, others would rise. His words were valued. His presence brought comfort. He was, by every measure, a man who had everything. But Job's greatness wasn't in his possessions. It was in his posture before God. Every morning, before the sun touched the rooftops, Job would rise in silence, kneel in reverence, and offer burnt sacrifices on behalf of his children, just in case one of them had cursed God in their heart. He didn't wait for problems to come to start praying. He prayed before the battle. He worshiped before the storm. His home was full of laughter, but also covered in reverence. There was no scandal in Job's house, no hidden corruption, no deceitful deals behind the scenes. Job didn't need revival because he lived daily in awareness of God. He was the kind of man we all hope to become, honored, trusted, blessed. And if the story ended there, we might assume that living a righteous life guarantees peace. But heaven had another plan, because one day, in a realm Job could not see, his name was spoken, not on earth, but in the throne room of God. And as angels gathered, as the morning stars sang their songs, one voice entered court, a voice twisted by pride. The accuser had come, and everything in Job's world was about to be tested. Far beyond the deserts of Uzi, beyond the reach of man's eyes or understanding, there is a throne, high and lifted up, surrounded by light no shadow can touch. And from that throne the universe is sustained. Stars hold their orbits, oceans know their borders, breath enters every living being. And one day, the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. The angels gathered, messengers, servants, guardians of light. They stood in perfect order, full of reverence, full of awe. And then another entered. He did not shine. He did not bow. His name was Satan, the accuser, the one who roams the earth, not to admire it, but to devour it. And the Lord spoke first. "Where have you come from?" Satan replied, "From roaming the earth, going back and forth on it." God looked upon him and asked, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him, blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. Imagine that. Your name, spoken by God, commended in the courts of heaven, not because you performed miracles, not because you led crowds, but simply because you live with integrity. Satan scoffed. His voice curled like smoke. Does Job fear God for nothing? Haven't you placed a hedge around him, around his household, and everything he has? You blessed the work of his hands. Of course he worships you. Then came the challenge. But stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. A pause filled heaven. The angels stood still, and God made a choice, one that Job would never hear, one that Job would never understand. Very well then, the Lord said, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger. And with those words, the hedge was lifted. The storm had been allowed, not as punishment, but as a proving ground, not to destroy Job's faith, but to reveal its roots. Satan left the presence of the Lord, and on the earth below, the wind began to change. Clouds gathered. Shadows crept toward the home of the righteous. And Job, completely unaware of the conversation that had just occurred in heaven, woke up to what would be the worst day of his life. It was an ordinary morning in UZ, the kind of morning where the air feels still and peaceful, where the sky glows golden over the horizon, and nothing seems out of place. Job had risen early, as he always did. He prayed, offered sacrifices for his children, just in case. He was grateful. Life was good. He had no reason to believe anything would be different. But while Job walked in peace on the earth, a storm had already been unleashed from heaven. It would not come with clouds. It would not come with warnings. It would come with messengers and ashes. The first servant came running, sweat on his face, dust in his hair, panic in his voice. Master, we were out in the field. The oxen were plowing, the donkeys grazing nearby, when the Sabaeans came. Armed men, swords drawn. They attacked us. They stole the animals and killed all the servants. I escaped. Just me. I'm the only one left. Job stood in silence before he could fully process the loss. Another voice pierced the air. A second servant stumbled forward, breathless, eyes wild. Fire, my lord, fire from heaven. It fell. It consumed the sheep. It spread fast, like nothing we've ever seen. The shepherds, they screamed. We tried to help. We couldn't. They're all gone. Every single one. 2 messengers. 2 disasters. Job's livestock, his livelihood, was vanishing. But there was no time to weep. No time to think. A third servant arrived. Dirty, shaking, covered in blood, not his own. The Chaldeans, they organized 3 bands. Coordinated, swift, brutal. They took the camels. They slaughtered the guards. I hid. I ran. I shouldn't even be alive. Job's eyes closed for a moment. His hands trembled. The world he had built for years, the empire, provision, structure, legacy, was being wiped out in minutes. Everything was unraveling. But the final messenger had not yet spoken. A 4th servant approached. But he didn't run. He walked slowly, and there was something in his silence that said more than words ever could. He fell to his knees. Your children, he began, barely able to lift his eyes. They were feasting in the home of your eldest son, when suddenly a wind came from the wilderness. It struck the house on all 4 sides. The walls collapsed. The roof fell in. My lord, there were no survivors. The words hung in the air. The wind had taken more than walls. It had taken blood, names, laughter, 10 lives. Job's greatest joy, gone in a single moment. The servant stood frozen, waiting for Job to speak. Would he scream? Collapse? Would he demand justice? Curse the sky? Job said nothing. He tore his robe, a symbol of deep grief. He shaved his head, a sign of mourning. Then he fell to the ground, not in rage, not in denial. He fell in worship. and from his lips came words that shook the heavens. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And in all this, Job did not sin. He did not charge God with wrongdoing. His heart was crushed. His home was ruined. But his faith was still standing. The dust had barely settled. 10 fresh graves, empty pastures, a home hollowed out by silence. And yet, Job still worshipped. In heaven, the angels watched in reverent awe, but not everyone was impressed. Once again, Satan came before the Lord. The courts of heaven stood still, and God spoke, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on earth, blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. And still, he maintains his integrity, even though you incited me against him, to ruin him without reason." But Satan was not finished. "Skin for skin," he sneered. "A man will give everything he has for his own life, but stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will curse you to your face." Another silence, and then God said, "Very well, he is in your hands, but you must not take his life." And just like that, the second wave began. No armies this time, no raiders, no winds. This time, the pain came from within. Job's skin broke out in sores, from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. Boils, infected, oozing, burning day and night. His breath stank, his skin blackened and peeled, his body shriveled. The man once admired by all now sat outside the city on an ash heap, scraping his wounds with broken pottery. No one approached him. No one comforted him. The man who used to feed the poor, who brought justice at the city gates, who blessed widows and protected orphans, was now alone, disfigured, forgotten, in agony. Then came the voice he least expected. His wife, the woman who had once bore him 10 children, now looked at him with bitter eyes. She had suffered too, lost her family, her wealth, her safety. But unlike Job, her sorrow had turned into scorn. "Are you still holding on to your integrity?" she asked. "Curse God and die." Her words hit harder than disease. Job, the man of strength, broken by grief, covered in pain, rejected by the one closest to him. And yet, he did not lash out. He did not fall apart. With gentleness and sorrow, he replied, "You speak like one of the foolish women. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" He didn't justify himself. He didn't defend God's plan. He simply held on. And even in all this, Job did not sin with his lips. The suffering had reached his body, his home, his marriage, but not his faith. Not yet. Word travels fast, even in sorrow. In distant lands, 3 men heard the same rumor. Job is no longer the man he once was. Eliphaz of Teman, Bildad of Shuhah, Zophar of Namath, friend from far away. They had once dined at Job's table, admired his wisdom, spoken of his integrity to others. And now, they came to see what had become of him, not to judge, not yet, but to mourn. When they saw Job from a distance, they didn't recognize him. His skin was raw, his body unrecognizable, his eyes sunken deep with grief. They tore their robes in anguish, sprinkled dust on their heads, and then they sat for 7 days and 7 nights. No one spoke a word, because what do you say to pain like that? What words could possibly explain it? What comfort fits into the cracks of such suffering? For 7 days, the only sounds were the crackling of fire, the buzz of flies, and the groans of a broken man. But on the 8th day, Job opened his mouth, and what came out was not praise. It was pain. He did not curse God, but he did curse the day of his birth. "Why did I not perish at birth?" he cried. "Why was I even born, if my life was to end like this?" He began to question not God's power, but his own existence. Why is life given to a man whose path is hidden, whom God has hedged in? His words were raw, honest, This wasn't rebellion. This was wrestling. Job wasn't demanding answers. He was pleading for relief, not because he had lost faith in God, but because he could no longer feel him. And for the first time, his friend spoke. Eliphaz, the oldest, was the first to break the silence. Can a man be more righteous than God? He asked. He spoke with a voice of tradition, of theology without tears. You reap what you sow, Job. God is just, if you're suffering, it must be because of something you've done. And with that, the friendship began to fracture. Bildad followed. Zophar joined. They didn't come with compassion. They came with conclusions. And each one, in different ways, said the same thing. This pain is your fault. But Job knew the truth. He had done nothing to deserve this. And so he spoke again, not to argue, but to cry out, though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. This was no longer just about grief. This was about a man holding on to God, even when everyone around him told him to let go. Time passed, but heaven remained quiet. The boils still burned. The memories still haunted. The friends still accused. And God said nothing. The silence was no longer just empty. It was heavy. It pressed on Job's chest like a weight he couldn't lift. He sat in ashes. He scratched his skin. He waited, but no voice came from the clouds. No dream in the night. No fire. No wind. No comfort. And so Job cried out again. Not like before. This time it was deeper, darker. Why do you hide your face from me? What is man that you make so much of him, that you examine him every morning and test him every moment? Will you never look away from me? Let me alone, God, just long enough to catch my breath. His words weren't polished. They were painful, not rehearsed, raw. And still, God did not answer. Job remembered the days when things were different. He remembered walking with dignity through the streets, when young men stepped aside out of respect, and elders stood in his presence. He remembered how God's light shone on his tent, how his steps were bathed in cream, how justice flowed like water from his mouth. And now, his name was mocked. The poor he once helped now spit at him. His skin clung to his bones. His soul felt abandoned. And yet, in his grief, Job did something remarkable. He never let go, even when God stayed silent. Job clung to the thread of faith with trembling hands. He said, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another. Oh, how my heart yearns within me. These weren't words of victory. These were words of hope in the dark. Job didn't ask for revenge. He didn't seek explanations. He just wanted one thing, to see God. Because in the middle of suffering, sometimes the greatest miracle is not healing, it's presence. And then, after the grief, after the accusations, after the cries that echoed through the silence, God spoke, not in a whisper, not in a vision, in a whirlwind, a storm, a rushing wind of glory and power. Job looked up, trembling, silent, undone, and the Lord said, Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. There was no anger, but there was authority. God didn't explain Job's suffering. He didn't defend himself. Instead, he lifted Job's eyes. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Who stretched a measuring line across it? Job had asked, Why? God replied, Look. He spoke of oceans and storehouses of snow, of mountain goats giving birth, of constellations dancing across the sky. He asked about the path of light, the flight of eagles, the roar of lions, and the secrets of the sea. It was not a lecture. It was an invitation to wonder. God never told Job about the conversation in heaven. He didn't explain the wager. He didn't reveal Satan's challenge. Because Job didn't need information. He needed perspective. He needed to see that the God who holds the stars in place is the same God who had never left his side. And when God finished speaking, Job fell to his knees. He said, "Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I repent, in dust and ashes." Job never got his questions answered, but he received something far greater, a revelation of who God truly is. And in that revelation, he found peace. Job was silent now, not because he was defeated, but because he had seen something deeper than answers. He had seen God, not the God of doctrine, not the God of debate, but the living, sovereign, holy God of mystery and mercy. And then something unexpected happened. God turned his attention to the friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, the ones who had spoken without knowledge, who judged without understanding. And the Lord said, "I am angry with you, because you have not spoken the truth about me, as my servant Job has." He commanded them to bring offerings, and said only Job could pray on their behalf. And Job did. The man they wounded, the man they misunderstood, prayed for them, not with bitterness, but with grace. And then the restoration began. The Lord blessed Job's latter days. More than the beginning, he received twice as much as before: 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 oxen, 1,000 donkeys, and yes, 10 more children, 7 sons, 3 daughters. The daughters were so beautiful, the most stunning in the land, that Job gave them an inheritance among their brothers, an act almost unheard of in ancient times. It was as if Job had seen the heart of God and now lived with open hands. Job lived 140 more years. He saw his children and their children to the 4th generation. And then, in peace, he died, not bitter, not broken, but full of days and full of God. If you like this video, we invite you to subscribe for more Bible stories. Until next time.